Hey guys, tonight we're cracking open a very quiet mystery, the kind that flickers in candlelight and yawns between midnight and dawn. You're stepping into a world where people didn't just sleep once a night, but twice. That's right, our ancestors didn't clock in for 8 solid hours. They had first sleep and second sleep, with a strange little wakeful pause in between. It sounds odd now, but in the 1700s, that was just Tuesday. Picture it. You're in a creaky little house somewhere in 18th century Europe. It's dark out. Proper dark, the kind we rarely see anymore. No glowing phones, no streetlights humming in the distance. Just a fire that's more glowing ember than flame, and a single beeswax candle slowly turning itself into a puddle. You probably won't survive this century without dying from something like bad air or an infected hangnail. But hey, at least you're well rested. Or sort of. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just banked the hearth for the night, wrapped in layers of linen and wool, and flopped onto a straw mattress with a sigh that rattles your ribcage. It's been a long day, feeding the chickens, dodging your landlord, helping your neighbor rethatch her leaky roof. You're asleep before the fire fully dies, bundled under thick quilts with a brick-warmed footstone to keep your toes from icing over. This is first sleep, and it's the easy part. By the clockless standards of your time, you're out cold by about 8:30 or 9 p.m., depending on the season. Night comes early here, especially in the depths of winter, and with no TV, no street noise, and no notifications to doom scroll through, there's really no point in staying up. So, everyone goes to bed early. Grandparents, toddlers, farm hands, out like candles. The house is mostly silent, save for the occasional crack from the cooling wood beams or the slow, satisfied exhale of your sleeping dog. The air smells like smoke and dried herbs. A pot of beans still steams near the hearth. Everything feels, for lack of a better word, still. Historians still argue whether people dreamed differently during segmented sleep. But many 18th century dream journals suggest that dreams between first and second sleep were especially vivid. Some swore they had more visions, more strange symbols, more divine insight in that early phase. Maybe it's because they fell asleep so fast. Or maybe it's just that waking up in the middle of the night made those dreams easier to remember. But for now, you're just asleep. Full, content, a little chilled, but used to it. There's no traffic, no glow from the next room, just you, your dreams, and a surprisingly loud mouse scuttling under the floorboards. And while you drift in first sleep, it's happening all across Europe. In France, a blacksmith snores under oxhide blankets. In a Scottish farmhouse, children share a bed, cheeks pressed together like puppies. In a Prussian town, a candle gutters in a nun's chamber as she stirs from a long nap before midnight prayers. This isn't just how you sleep, it's how everyone sleeps. One quirky bit? In some places, neighbors expected each other to be available during the night break. A knock on the shutters at 1 a.m. wasn't always cause for panic. It might just mean someone's run out of firewood and needs to borrow a log. Or they want help interpreting a dream. Yes, really. Some even left little snacks out, nuts, bits of bread, for when they woke up later. Midnight snack culture older than we thought. And there's something oddly cozy about it all. A world dimmer, yes, but gentler. You didn't need blackout curtains. The darkness did the job. The silence wrapped around you like a second quilt. But soon, your eyes will flutter open. The embers will glow brighter against the dark. And the second act of your night, the waking hour between sleeps, is just around the corner. You stir, not with the panic of modern insomnia, but with the drowsy acceptance of someone who knows that waking up in the middle of the night is simply what happens. It's probably somewhere around midnight, maybe a little before. Not that you'd know. There's no clock in your home, unless you're among the very wealthy, and even then, it likely chimes once every hour without giving you much detail. You stretch beneath scratchy wool covers, yawn without covering your mouth. There's no one awake to care, and stare up at the rough wooden beams of your ceiling. This is normal, expected even. In the 18th century, sleep was not one continuous block. It came in two distinct shifts, first sleep and second sleep. And what you're in now is that curious, hazy space between the two, a naturally occurring wakeful period that usually lasted anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. This concept might sound radical today, but it was common knowledge back then. A typical evening in rural Europe might involve sleeping for 4 hours, waking up around midnight, and then easing back into a second, deeper sleep until dawn. Historians still argue whether this segmented pattern was biologically hardwired or simply a response to the way people lived before artificial lighting. But one thing is clear: people weren't freaked out by their nighttime wakefulness. They expected it. So, what does one do at midnight in a world where Instagram and microwave popcorn don't exist? You might light a small candle with a glowing ember from the hearth. You don't want to waste wax. Those things are expensive. But it's nice to have just enough light to see your hands. Maybe you roll over, sigh, and say a quiet prayer. In fact, this time between sleeps was often seen as ideal for spiritual reflection. Monastic communities, like the Benedictines, were especially big on this. They even structured their entire schedules around waking at night for brief prayer. So you're in good company if you mutter a few lines of the Lord's Prayer before reaching for your wool shawl. Or maybe you do something more practical. Refuel the fire. Put a log back in the hearth. It's cold out. This is the Little Ice Age after all, and winters can be brutal. Firekeeping is life-keeping. If you're a farmer, this might also be the time to step outside, check on livestock, or relieve yourself in the frosty yard. A delightful detail: chamber pots were common but not always available, and depending on your social class, your midnight bathroom might be just a walk into the snowy garden. And yes, for many, this was also the time to talk. Couples would whisper in the dark, share dreams, maybe plan for the next day. You might turn to your spouse, or more likely, to the person you share a bed with, which might be a sibling or a friend, thanks to the cozy and communal nature of sleeping in this era, and talk about the weather, or that weird story you overheard at the market, or the dreams you just had. You know, the ones with the talking goat and the floating spoon. Sometimes people even got out of bed, not to party, but to do light household chores. Mending clothes, spinning wool, even chopping vegetables. The idea of being productive at midnight wasn't strange at all. Just quiet productivity. The kind that didn't involve loud noise, big tools, or dramatic effort. There's a curious fringe record of some people using this time to read, especially among the literate upper class. By candlelight, of course. The warm, flickering glow of a tallow candle on a handwritten book of herbal remedies. Yes, that was someone's 1 a.m. vibe. There's even a record of a man in England in 1742 who would brew tea at midnight and sip it while writing letters to his adult children. One of his sons apparently complained, "You write as if you'd just risen for the day, and yet it be barely past midnight." Maybe Dad just liked his peace and quiet. Another quirky tidbit. In some towns, the village priest would schedule informal confessions during this wakeful time. If you're up anyway, the logic went, you might as well purify your soul. Of course, not everyone was quite so wholesome. There are whispers in the diaries of midwives and night watchmen that some folks use this time for trysts, secret rendezvous in barns and alleyways. Why not? Everyone else was asleep. And as you'll find out in a few sections, some marriages were built more on economics than passion, which made midnight escapes rather tempting. But back in your home, things are quiet. You sip a bit of leftover broth. The fire has warmed your toes again. You listen to the wind gently pressing against the shutters, and maybe the distant howl of a dog or two. You aren't worried about being awake. You don't question your body. You don't Google symptoms. You simply live in this space between dreams. You might even enjoy it. Historians have noted that in letters and diaries from the period, people rarely spoke of this wakeful interval with frustration. In fact, they used words like gentle, peaceful, and useful. To them, sleep wasn't a monolith. It was something you slipped in and out of, like a warm bath. They floated through the night in parts. Soon, you'll be ready to sink into sleep again. But not quite yet. The log crackles. You nestle back under the covers. The air smells faintly of smoke and bread. And as your eyes grow heavy again, your mind starts to blur. Dreams start to poke at the edge of your vision. And with that, second sleep is calling. Your body shifts again, but this time there's no candle. The ember has cooled just enough to let shadows take over. You've drunk your broth, stoked the fire, maybe muttered a little prayer, or recited the dream with the floating spoon, and now you lie still beneath the quilts. The air is heavier now, weighted with the hush of deep night. Your limbs stretch, adjust, then melt into the straw mattress. There's a creak of wood somewhere beyond your bedpost, a gentle reminder that the house breathes too, and slowly you fall. This is second sleep. It's deeper than the first, richer. It's the one with heavier dreams and thicker time. People often described this second stretch as true rest. First sleep was a winding down. Second sleep was the full plunge. If first sleep came easily because nightfall practically forced it, second sleep came more luxuriously, like slipping back into a warm bath after toweling off for a moment. You're already half relaxed. You're already halfway under. All you have to do is give in. And give in you do. Across 18th century Europe, second sleep was a sacred kind of slumber. Peasants, especially, treasured it after their midnight routines, checking on the fire, tending a sick child, walking outside for a breath of cold air. Midwives and mothers often timed feedings around it. Farmers adjusted their chores so they could make the most of those final hours before dawn. One Englishman in 1737 wrote that, "It is during my second sleep that I see most clearly the likeness of heaven." He may have been a bit dramatic, or just very well rested. Historians still debate whether the second sleep had different biological characteristics, deeper REM stages, more vivid dreaming. But in the personal writings of the time, second sleep was consistently more beloved, perhaps because it came after choice, not just circumstance. You chose to lie down again. You returned to sleep consciously, and that made it feel all the more rewarding. Second sleep was also practical. In many villages, the workday began just after sunrise, which meant you couldn't afford to sleep until 10. So if you were going to get in your full 7 or 8 hours, it had to be broken up. Remember, there was no 9 to 5 yet. Time was measured in seasons, sunrise, and chores. So if you needed to start kneading dough at 5 a.m., second sleep had to begin no later than 1:30 or 2 a.m. Otherwise, you'd miss the bread and miss breakfast altogether. But second sleep wasn't just about practicality. It was about rhythm. And rhythm ruled everything. Church bells, sunrises, bird calls. The very structure of society in the 1700s followed natural cadence. And sleep followed it too. You breathe deeper now. Your heart rate slows. Your body falls into that languid, dream-drenched state that only seems to come after a good midnight stretch. There's no worry in your gut, no self-judgment, no comparing yourself to that one guy who claims to wake at 5 a.m. Just for fun, sleep is what it is, and right now, it's good. Another quirky detail: some preachers of the time believed second sleep was when Satan did most of his whispering. A few old sermons even warned congregants to beware the thoughts that come in the second rest. To which you'd probably reply, "That sounds like a you problem, Reverend." For most people, though, this was the peaceful part. The fire was settled. The neighbors weren't knocking. The wind had died down. If you were lucky, your hay-stuffed mattress didn't have too many pokey bits. You slept with your family all around you. Co-sleeping wasn't just common, it was unavoidable. One bed, maybe two. Children on top of the covers, snoring. A cat curled up near your ankles, radiating warmth. And no noise. None. Not even birds yet. Not even dogs. The world had quieted to its softest hum. Second sleep was also where the dreams lived. The long, roaming, nonsensical dreams that made it into diaries and oral histories. People remembered these dreams in detail. They believed they were messages or omens or signs of spiritual balance. One man recorded dreaming of a river full of silver shoes that spoke in riddles. Another wrote about floating into the sun and being gently baked like bread. Dreams were often shared the next morning, especially in tight-knit families. What did you dream during second sleep? Was a real breakfast question. The answers varied wildly. But everyone knew second sleep dreams were the important ones. You stir just a little now, but don't wake. You sink. Sink past the beam of moonlight that dares to peek through the wooden shutter. Sink past the muffled howl of a fox outside. Sink into that velvety dark that only people without electricity ever really knew. It's not just you. Across Europe, second sleep is underway. In Poland, a cobbler dreams of his lost dog. In Italy, a widow remembers the sound of her husband's laugh. In Ireland, a boy dreams of catching a trout the size of a horse. You are part of a rhythm bigger than yourself. A collective sigh stretched across nations. And as you lie there, slack-jawed, drooling a little, as is your right, dawn creeps just a sliver closer. You don't fully wake this time, not like before, but you shift slightly under your blanket. There's a tickle in your nose, maybe from a bit of hay poking through the mattress ticking. Or maybe it's that mouse again, making a heroic attempt at dragging an entire oat kernel into the wall. You're still nestled in the depths of second sleep, but your body stirs just enough to sense it's not quite night anymore. The room smells different. Less smoke, more morning damp. The faintest draft brushes your forehead. There's no rooster yet, but your ears begin to register the tiniest signals. A creak of floorboards in the next house, or the sigh of someone turning over beside you. What really wakes people up in this century, though, is not alarm clocks. It's not even roosters, despite their reputation. It's bladders. That's right. One of the most reliable triggers for waking between first and second sleep in the 18th century was the humble need to relieve oneself. No polite way around it. Chamber pots were your friend, if you had one. If not, well, the outhouse was waiting, or the bush behind the barn. Waking up to pee was so normal, so expected, that most households had a system. The pot was passed around, or someone took a torch outside, barefoot and grumbling, trying not to step in something regrettable. And if you were lucky, the stars were out. And if you weren't, rain, mud, mosquitoes the size of walnuts. Historians still argue whether waking up for bodily functions created segmented sleep, or whether segmented sleep allowed those wake-ups to become culturally accepted, chicken or egg, or, well, chamber pot or bladder. But it wasn't just bathroom business that woke people between sleeps. Firewood was another culprit. Houses were drafty. Insulation wasn't a thing, and if your fire went out during the night, you'd wake up freezing. This wasn't just inconvenient. It could be dangerous. So many households assigned someone, often the oldest child or the lightest sleeper, to toss another log onto the hearth sometime after midnight. You might also wake because of animals. If you lived on a farm, and most people did, there were cows to check, dogs to hush, or the occasional panicked goat making sounds that would chill your soul. Some people even claimed to hear ghosts in this silent hour, though more likely it was just the wind or a cousin snoring 2 feet away. And then there was prayer. Many people, especially the religious, believed the space between sleeps was the perfect time to talk to God. Quiet, still, uncluttered by the chaos of the day. Midnight was holy in its own strange, sleepy way. Monks and nuns had entire night vigils structured around this belief, but even lay people would take advantage of the break to kneel by the fire or mutter rosaries into their straw pillow. There are even preserved prayer manuals that include specific lines for the hour between rests. It's not hard to imagine a candlelit whisper, "Lord, preserve me in my weariness, and let sleep return with grace." Not a bad mantra, honestly. And don't forget, some people chose to wake up. This was a time when timing your sleep around moonlight was a real thing. If you were a midwife, a thief, or just a romantic soul hoping to write poetry by silver glow, that middle of the night wake-up was your time to shine, literally. One curious account from 1791 tells of a man in Wales who used to climb a hill at midnight to look for smugglers. Not because he was hired to, but because, as he put it, there's nothing else on, and I rather like the walk. And if none of these woke you up, your body probably did it all by itself. Just because. That's the odd part. In many accounts, people didn't need anything external to rouse them. They simply woke. No panic, no dread, no harsh realization that they'd have to teach a class or attend a meeting in 3 hours. Just a gentle blink, a moment to exist in the middle of the night. And then, a quiet return to dreams. This brings us to something many modern listeners might not expect. People weren't scared of being awake. There was no anxiety spiral, no "I'll be useless tomorrow" loop playing in their heads. Being awake at 2 a.m. wasn't a failure, it was built in. In fact, some people actually looked forward to it. An aristocrat's letter from 1764 describes this period as "my favorite time of solitude, when the world is mine alone, and even my own thoughts seem softer." Someone clearly didn't have toddlers. There's something beautifully human about it, really. This idea that waking up isn't always bad, that sleep isn't broken just because it comes in parts, that your body knows what it's doing. And so here you are again, maybe freshly returned from the chilly outhouse, or maybe just blinking into the dark, ready to curl back under the covers. The fire crackles one last time. Your eyes flutter. Second sleep is ready for you. And this time, you fall even faster. The candle's long gone out now, burned down to a puddle of beeswax hours ago. The fire glows low but steady, casting warm pulses on the wall like a gentle heartbeat. Outside, nothing stirs. The town, the fields, the roads, every corner of your world has sunk into stillness. You're deep in second sleep. But if you were to wake, and some do, you wouldn't panic. Because in this in-between realm, in this curious hollow between midnight and dawn, there's an entire microcosm of midnight activity. It's quiet, it's domestic, it's deeply human. So, what did people actually do during this break between sleeps? Let's imagine you do stir, just enough to sit up, maybe light a stub of candle or poke the fire. You're not done sleeping, but you're not rushing back under the covers either. You wouldn't be alone. In homes across 18th century Europe, this time was known quite literally as the watch, a pause between first and second sleep, and it was often filled with nothing dramatic, but something calm, software intimate. You might chat. This hour was prized for quiet conversation. Think whispered exchanges, gentle laughter under quilts, and thoughtful reflections. You're in your nightclothes, layers of linen and flannel, and everyone around you is at their most unguarded. There's no rush, no noise, just a warm bed, a low fire, and the sweet feeling of time being momentarily suspended. In many homes, especially among the working class, this was the only private time adults had to speak openly. Children were asleep, chores were paused, and the village was hushed. It's when couples really talked. Did you see how much meat Martha took at the feast? I did, and she hid a ham in her shawl, too. Historians still debate whether this midnight window led to deeper intimacy in relationships. Some argue it helped strengthen family bonds. Others suggest it was more practical, a quiet time to review tasks, budgets, or the next day's market list. Not everything was talk, of course. People read. Books by candlelight weren't easy, but they were cherished. A well-worn prayer book, a cheap chapbook with folk tales, maybe even a translated collection of fables if you were lucky enough to afford one. One French woman in 1788 wrote in her diary that she liked to pretend I am the only soul alive, reading by flame while the world sleeps. Dramatic? Yes. Relatable? Also yes. Others used the time for letter writing, especially among the educated. One scholar boasted that he penned half his best Latin at 2 a.m. Many early letters have timestamps like "in the hours between sleeps," which is both poetic and slightly smug. Now, let's talk about practical tasks. This break was often filled with gentle labor, nothing too noisy, of course. You might spin a bit of wool, patch a torn chemise, or peel turnips for the morning pottage. Quiet, repetitive work that kept hands busy while thoughts drifted. In winter, some women would use this hour to knit woolen socks or roll beeswax candles. In summer, they might crush herbs or dry flowers by the fire. And if you were a servant or apprentice, midnight was sometimes your only window to do your own mending. Fix your shirt, wash your undergarments, or just sit and not be told what to do. Even just that was a luxury. One of the more tender customs? Breastfeeding. Mothers often woke during this hour to feed infants, and in homes where wet nurses were employed, the night nurse might use this time to sing softly or rock the child with songs passed down for generations. Songs for the second sleep, if you will. Another curious slice of nightlife. Dream recounting. Yes, dream gossip was a thing. If someone had an especially vivid dream during first sleep, they might share it before returning to bed. A walking cow, a glowing fish, a dead uncle playing a fiddle. All fair game. Sometimes these stories were interpreted, other times simply laughed at. Occasionally, someone would get very serious and claim it was an omen. It rarely was. It was usually just the fish stew. And yet, not everything was gentle. In some corners of Europe, there were those who believed the middle of the night hour was dangerous. A time when witches gathered, or when night hags visited the restless. These ideas often lived in folk tales and were whispered to children who refused to lie still. So if you're a child in a drafty cottage, awake at 1 a.m., you might be warned. Close your eyes, or the crone will see you. That'll knock you right back to sleep, won't it? On a less ominous note, sexual activity was also frequently recorded during this hour. Medical texts of the era even advised couples that the wakeful period between sleeps was the most natural and harmonious time for conjugal affection. The body apparently was well rested, relaxed, and in a good mood. Romantic? No. Of course, there's always the possibility you simply sat there. Sat and existed. Listened to the wind, let your thoughts wander, looked at the dancing firelight and reflected on how quiet everything had become. These were people with time, and while their days were harder, their nights had breath in them. And now, as the fire burns down again, and your limbs grow heavier, you start to slide once more into sleep. No fanfare, no stress, just the natural rhythm returning. The second sleep is waiting. You're sinking again. Not suddenly, not like a stone into a pond, but slowly, like honey sliding off a spoon. Second sleep wraps around you now, smoother and heavier than the first. You've had your little pause, your midnight tea, your quiet chat, your soft stare at the glowing embers. And now you give in to the pull. There's no resistance, no urgency, just gravity, warmth, and a mattress that smells faintly of lavender and ash. In this stretch of the night, sleep becomes profound. And in the 18th century, people noticed. Second sleep wasn't just a return to unconsciousness. It was a descent into what many described as dream-rich hours. Some diarists claimed this was when their souls traveled. Others believed this second phase brought the deepest rest, the most healing. Modern researchers still puzzle over this. Historians still debate whether segmented sleep allowed for more frequent entry into REM cycles, or if it simply created the illusion of richer dreaming due to the reset midway through. But science aside, What you feel now is unmistakable. You are gone, draped over the mattress like a melted wax figure, limpio, quiet, dreaming again. Only this time the dreams stretch longer, grow stranger, bloom wider. One farmer wrote that his second sleep dreams felt like walking through syrup-colored air. Another said he could hear bells in the distance that did not exist. One woman dreamed of an entire wedding attended only by birds, all wearing waistcoats. Who knows? Maybe she was onto something. In your second sleep, the fire needs no tending. The house holds its own warmth. The outside world doesn't intrude. Not yet. The wind could be whispering secrets to the trees, and you wouldn't notice. This phase was often when Maikain children wet the bed, much to the dismay of parents. Some families trained their children to wake briefly between sleeps to avoid such mishaps. Others accepted it as part of life and kept a cloth nearby. Still others saw it as a sign the child was too deep in the second rest, as one 1782 housekeeping manual puts it. You shift in bed just a little. Perhaps someone next to you breathes heavier, turns over, murmurs a nonsense word. You don't wake fully, but your ears absorb it, tuck it away, and keep dreaming. You're only partially tethered to your surroundings now. Meanwhile, out in the world, this phase of night is even more sacred. For certain people, monks, for example, would sometimes re-enter prayer after second sleep. Matins, or night prayers, were held before dawn, often around 3 or 4 a.m. Imagine rising from a warm cot in a freezing stone abbey, pulling on wool robes and making your way to a candlelit chapel where chants echo against cold stone walls. These monks practiced polyphasic sleep. Centuries before it had a name. First sleep, prayers. Second sleep, more prayers. It was life carved into slices of silence. You, however, are no monk. You're just someone who's curled into a ball, one arm flung off the mattress, drooling into a lumpy pillow made of linen, down, and 200 years of sweaty inheritance. And this is as restful as it gets. In these hours, second sleep often included sleep talking, sleepwalking, and what we might now call parasomnias. There are stories of people waking up in the bread oven, thankfully unlit, wandering to a neighbor's barn, or even ending up under the wrong bed entirely. In many rural communities, this was chalked up to the restless spirits of the blood, or just eating too much mutton stew before bed. One French superstition claimed that anyone who tried to interrupt another's second sleep would suffer a day without peace, which sounds exactly like what happens when you wake someone too early, even now. It's in this phase, too, that pregnant women were most closely monitored. Many believed second sleep held prophetic dreams about the child. There's a preserved letter from a midwife in 1790 describing a woman who dreamed of a red fox during second sleep. She swore the baby would be sly, and when he was born with a mop of orange hair, the family started calling him Renard, Fox. He hated it, presumably forever. But let's pull back again. Your breathing slows. The room feels like it's folded in on itself. The fire's ember gives off a glow no brighter than a dying thought. Even the wind outside has hushed, perhaps in deference to your descent. And soon, it's almost morning. The second sleep begins to loosen its grip. Your body twitches just a little. Your eyelids tremble. Somewhere deep in your dream, the narrative is starting to fray at the edges, like an old quilt unraveled by time and sunlight. But there's still a little time left. A few more minutes to exist in this state of not waking. The space where the body is whole and the world is soft. and no one expects anything from you just yet. You've ridden the rhythm exactly as your ancestors did. Sleep, wake, pause, sleep again. And now, the day is gently, quietly beginning. The light is returning, just barely. A soft blue washes against the shutter cracks. The air carries that first quiet scent of morning, dew settling, earth warming, animals rustling gently back into motion. You're still beneath your covers, wrapped like a potato in your linen cocoon, but the atmosphere is shifting. Second sleep is thinning. It's not abrupt. No harsh alarms. No espresso-fueled jolt. Instead, your body senses that the rhythm of night is breaking, not ending, just changing key. And here's the fascinating thing. This whole system worked for everyone, not just farmers or monks or the wealthy with nothing to do. Segmented sleep made sense across the social spectrum, from abbots in candlelit scriptoria to stable hands curled beside their horses. Let's take a look at how different groups adapted to this pattern. For the profound religious, especially monastics, two-part sleep wasn't just biological. It was institutionalized. As early as the 9th century, Benedictine monks followed structured divine office hours, which included nighttime prayers or vigils. By the 1700s, this tradition had trickled outward into convents, seminaries, and even lay households influenced by religious routine. If you were especially devout, you might rise after first sleep to pray, not just because you were awake, but because you believed that wakefulness had spiritual purpose. Historians still argue whether these religious practices shaped general sleep culture or simply adapted to it. Was God's plan really behind segmented sleep? Or were the monks just really good at working with what human bodies already did? Then there were the peasants, the laboring backbone of 18th century society. They didn't have the luxury of sleeping whenever they wanted. Daylight dictated labor. If you needed to be up by 5 a.m. to begin harvesting, you couldn't exactly lounge until sunrise. Segmenting sleep allowed them to retire early, wake briefly, and still get in a second, replenishing stretch of rest. A French field hand in 1744 described it this way: "The first sleep quiets the bones. The second sleep quiets the heart." Craftsmen, too, cobblers, tailors, coopers, often used the midnight gap for small, silent tasks, sharpening tools, sketching new designs, mending a child's shoes. There's a curious record of a Dutch chairmaker who claimed he did his best carving between the sleeps. He would light a single lantern, work for half an hour, then return to bed, convinced that the wood somehow cooperated better at that hour. Wood with manners, only in the 1700s. Even nobility weren't exempt from the segmented rhythm. Despite their satin sheets and silk sleeping gowns, they too followed the sun. One French marquise famously wrote in a letter, "After my first rest, I rise to write letters and reflect. I find that silence makes for clearer thoughts and kinder ones." Of course, she also claimed she dreamt of floating through Versailles while servants fanned her with tulip petals. So take her clarity with a pinch of fleur de sel. Segmented sleep even showed up in urban environments, though with a twist. Cities like Paris, London, and Vienna had their own complications: noise, crime, denser housing. But many city dwellers still described the two-sleep pattern in their journals and correspondence. Night watchmen, in particular, would report seeing windows flicker to life around midnight, only to go dark again an hour later. And let's not forget servants, often tasked with maintaining fires, attending to restless babies, or preparing early breakfasts. For them, this midnight window wasn't always restful, but many still used the lull to sneak a few pages of reading, a prayer, or a whispered chat with a fellow housemaid. The point is, this wasn't some niche phenomenon. Segmented sleep worked because it fit into the demands of real life. Think about how beautifully the rhythm aligned with necessity. Darkness arrived early bedtime. Waking up at night, chance to pray, reflect, do chores. Dawn, time to work again. It was efficient, adaptable, and natural. Compare that to today, where many people lie awake at 3 a.m., convinced their body is betraying them. Back then, being awake in the middle of the night didn't mean something was wrong. It just meant you were human. One quirky historical tidbit: in some households with lodgers, people coordinated their segmented sleep to avoid awkward encounters. A landlady in Edinburgh noted that she advised her male and female boarders to take their first sleep fully before passing into the shared quarters. Basically, a polite way of saying, "No midnight mingling, please." There are also records of honor, courtship, happening in this in-between space. In some cultures, the wakeful hour was when suitors whispered through windows or exchanged notes under doors. Not exactly Netflix and chill, but very 1700s romantic. So now, lying in your bed in the thick of second sleep, surrounded by layers of blankets and slow, even breathing, you're not just resting. You're participating in a centuries-old pattern. One that was flexible enough for monks, midwives, blacksmiths, and barons. A rhythm that didn't require clocks, apps, or a sleep coach named Brent. You turn slightly. The blanket slides against your shoulder. Someone's soft snores murmur nearby. The blue light creeps a little further through the shutters. You have a few more minutes before the rooster crows, before the fire gets stoked again, before the day begins in full. So let your limbs go heavy again. Your thoughts drift sideways. Sink deeper. One last time. Second sleep isn't over yet. The sky has shifted, not entirely lit, but no longer black. That strange electric blue hue, just before sunrise, leaks in through the slats in the shutters. It touches the wooden floor, climbs the leg of a stool, and creeps across your toes like a curious cat. You stir, not fully waking yet, but sensing that your time inside second sleep is almost done. This moment, this narrow window between true night and true morning, was precious to many in the 18th century. Because as the world began to reanimate, you could steal a few more moments of peace, of softness, of half-sleep. And in that in-between state, something magical often happened. Dreams and waking life bled together. If you just dreamed of dancing geese in powdered wigs, you might open your eyes and still half expect them to waddle by your bedside. The line was blurry. Second sleep ended slowly, like a candle burning down, not with a bang, but with a quiet fade. This is also the time when households began their subtle morning rituals. Nothing loud, nothing rushed, just the beginnings of return. In many homes, fires were rekindled as the first priority. A cold hearth was not just uncomfortable, it was impractical. So someone, usually the same person who tossed in a log during the midnight wake, would rise again to coax new flames from yesterday's coals. Sometimes that someone was you. You'd shuffle over in wool socks, if you owned such a luxury, or barefoot on rough planks, teeth chattering. You'd crouch down, blow gently, feed the spark, and wait for the kindling to catch. The fire didn't just warm the room, it woke the house. Slowly, gently, as it always had. By the time the room began to glow again, others would be waking on too, siblings muttering in their sleep, a baby whimpering softly, a parent shifting under a quilt. Not everyone jumped out of bed. Not yet. But there was movement, breath, life. Historians still debate whether the return to wakefulness after second sleep was harder or softer than rising from a full night's rest. Some argue that the segmented pattern meant lighter mornings. Others say it was the second phase of sleep, being deeper, that made waking more sluggish. Either way, there was a consensus across many letters and diaries. The waking felt natural, like a tide going out. No mental thrashing, just a slow awareness. And what did people do with these early moments? They listened. Birdsong. That was your 18th century alarm clock. Sparrows, thrushes, crows, maybe even a rooster if you lived in the countryside or near a vendor who kept one out of sheer habit. The noise didn't blare. It swelled, gradually, layer by layer. One bird chirped, then another. And soon, the world was humming. Next came movement. You'd stretch beneath the covers, not quite ready to face the cold. You'd reach for a shawl, or maybe a warm brick wrapped in cloth if your household used those as foot warmers overnight. You'd yawn, scratch. Think about breakfast. Speaking of which, food. After second sleep wasn't extravagant, but it was comforting. Porridge, crusty bread, maybe cheese if it hadn't gone moldy. Some households brewed a weak beer or watered-down cider to sip warm with the first meal. And yes, in a few wealthier homes, tea or coffee might be prepared, though these were luxuries, imported, costly, and mostly reserved for special guests or the well-to-do. One curious tidbit: in several towns, street vendors would begin setting up as the second sleep faded. Bread carts, pottage sellers, and women hawking morning milk made their rounds quietly, letting their presence be known by scent and sound more than shouting. So as the town or village came back to life, everyone carried with them a kind of sleep-earned calm, the memory of the night's rhythm still resting behind their eyes. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Some people didn't rise immediately after second sleep. Instead, they allowed themselves a third rest. Yes, a third nap, in a way. Particularly on days without urgent labor, or among scholars, clergy, or the wealthy, there are records of people lingering in bed even after sunrise. They would lie in, not because they were lazy, but because they could. The sun might be up, but if the weather was cold or the room still dim, second sleep could bleed into a gentle morning doze. One English rector in 1755 wrote that he found God's voice most clear between rising and breakfast, whilst wrapped still in the quilt of dreams, which, let's admit, is exactly the kind of thing only a man with no children says. And then, of course, there were those who didn't get to linger. Midwives, blacksmiths, bakers, stable boys. Their second sleep ended the moment the sky hinted at light. They didn't luxuriate. They moved, they worked, because their world required it. But even among them, there's evidence that the segmented night gave them strength, more resilience, a pause that let them refuel before facing their hardest hours. So now, in your own imagined 18th century bed, lying under wool blankets with a faint sheen of early morning around you, you begin to move. Your dreams fade, but don't vanish. You remember something about a talking hedgehog in a tower made of flour, but it's already dissolving. The fire whispers. A kettle clinks. Someone coughs softly in the next room. The second sleep is ended. But somehow, you don't feel cheated. You feel restored. You are ready. You sit up slowly. There's no alarm, no jangling bell or blaring phone, just the natural stirrings of a house gently returning to life. The smell of smoke from the fire mingles with something faintly yeasty. Maybe someone has already begun kneading bread. Maybe that someone is you. Your back aches a little, but it's the honest kind of ache, earned from a life of moving, lifting, working. The sort of discomfort people didn't fight with orthopedic mattresses and ergonomic pillows, but rather accepted like the weather, just part of the fabric of daily life. Outside, the world is still pale with morning. Trees seem to exhale mist. Chickens rustle in coops. A cart creaks somewhere down the lane, its wheels crunching gravel in a rhythm you've known since childhood. Your second sleep is over. The dream fog is gone. You're truly awake now. So what happens next? Well, in the 18th century, the day began early, but gently, and your body, having already had 2 full stretches of sleep, first and second, doesn't resist the morning light. You feel like you've eased your way into consciousness, not been shoved into it. There's something different about that. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep led to greater overall health, sharper cognition, or reduced stress. While the science is still ongoing, what's clear from letters, diaries, and the sheer energy of those early risers is that people functioned well. They weren't dragging themselves through the day half asleep. They'd had time to sleep, to wake, to sleep again, and to wake once more, even without caffeine. Though, yes, tea and coffee were beginning to make their entrance into European mornings by this point, particularly among the wealthier classes. Coffee houses were flourishing in places like London, Paris, and Vienna, places where merchants, writers, and politicians gathered for warm drinks and pointed conversation. These were not just for pleasure. They were seen as stimulants of both mind and body. For everyone else, mornings often started with something far more modest. Small beer or herbal tisane, both far weaker than their modern counterparts, but soothing in their own way. In the home, morning routines were dictated by your role. In the household, if you were a child, your first job was to wash, often in cold water, from a basin that made you gasp and shake as your mother scolded. Quickly now, the cows don't wait. Clothes came next. Layered linen, wool, sometimes hand-me-downs patched and darned over 3 siblings' worth of elbows. If you were a woman, you might begin by tending to the hearth, checking the embers, setting a pot to boil, laying out cloth for baking, or gathering eggs, or waking younger children. The rhythm was relentless but familiar. If you were a man, your morning might mean checking the animals, preparing tools, or heading out to join neighbors in whatever task the day demanded. Harvest, repair, construction, market. And if you were a tradesman, tailor, cooper, mason, you likely rose early to set out your wares or prep your workspace before customers arrived. And yet, despite all this movement, there was a kind of calm in the morning. Why? Because your sleep had been full. Staggered, yes, but complete. Modern listeners often picture segmented sleep as disruptive, but for these people, it offered balance. It gave them a chance to rest, to reflect, to transition. The midnight hour became a pressure valve, a space to breathe in the middle of their long, demanding lives. Compare that to now, when we demand that our sleep be continuous, perfect, and complete. We panic when we wake at 3 a.m., convinced something must be wrong. But in the 1700s, waking at 3 o'clock wasn't failure. It was expected, even welcome. A letter from a Scottish farmer in 1769 puts it best. "I lay me down, I sleep a while, I rise to think, and sleep again. It is good. It is enough." That's the sentiment, really. Not perfection, not optimization. Just enough. And so, here you are now, washing your face, tying your laces, placing a pot over the fire, or maybe just sitting quietly as the rest of the house stirs. The second sleep behind you, the full day ahead. You don't need a calendar to know the rhythm. The sun is your scheduler. The chores your guide, your body your trusted clock. You've slept in segments, but your car rest is whole. Maybe someone sneezes, maybe someone laughs, maybe someone groans about a sore ankle or a blistered thumb. These are the sounds of life, returning. And now, so do you. You pull on your coat, step outside, and breathe the cool morning air. There's a bird singing on the thatched roof. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once, then settles. You're ready. The door creaks open. You step outside into the cool, damp breath of the 18th century morning. The earth beneath your feet feels soft, a little muddy from last night's rain. A light fog sits low, like the world is still wrapped in its own second sleep. Trees drip quietly. The sky is still deciding whether it wants to be gray or golden. Your breath fogs in the air. You rub your hands together. The cold isn't sharp yet, but it's there, nudging at your sleeves, reminding you that the sun might be awake, but it's still deciding whether to warm anything. You walk the path to the barn, to the fields, or maybe to the street if you live in town. Wherever you are, you're not alone. Others are waking too. A neighbor coughs over a fence. A cart rolls by, wooden wheels rumbling. A baker's door swings open, and that warm, blessed scent of bread wafts into the street like a promise. And what's powering all of it? This morning bustle? People who slept in 2 shifts. It's hard to overstate just how normal this was. In fact, many language references from the 18th century point to segmented sleep being built into the culture itself. Phrases like first nap, second rest, and the watch pop up in letters, recipes, sermons, and even court testimony. For example, if a crime happened between the sleeps, people didn't need clarification. They knew that meant sometime between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Just as we might say after lunch or around bedtime, they had midnight context baked into everyday life. Historians still debate whether industrialization was the true death knell for this rhythm, or if it had already begun to shift earlier. The rise of artificial lighting, more rigid work schedules, and urban living certainly played a role. But even as late as the early 1800s, plenty of rural communities were still snoozing in segments. And they weren't ashamed of it. Quite the opposite. Many medical texts of the time actually endorsed segmented sleep. Physicians recommended it as a cure for nervous complaints, sour digestion, and even melancholy. Some advised their patients to use the midnight interval for prayer, light exercise, or writing. One British doctor wrote in 1786 that a thoughtful interval between sleeps is as good for the mind as 2 eggs are for the stomach. We love a man with strong metaphors. Back to your morning walk. Let's say you're heading to market today. Your basket is half full already. Some root vegetables from the cellar, a wedge of cheese, a jar of yesterday's broth. Your goal is to trade, or maybe pick up flour, soap, or fabric scraps. You pass neighbors on the road, each carrying their own goods, each of them having emerged, like you, from their second sleep, just an hour or two ago. There's a comfort in this shared rhythm. No one's blinking at you, asking why you were awake at 1 a.m. No one's judging you for having nodded off at 8 p.m. the night before. Everyone understands the cycle. Everyone lives it. Even artists and writers of the time played into the two-sleep model. Several journals mention poets rising after first sleep to scribble lines they'd dreamed, then returning to bed before dawn. A Parisian painter described his best ideas coming when the world was silent, and I had left one dream but not yet entered the next. Yes, it was a sleepy century, but it was also a quietly creative one. And speaking of dreams, let's not forget how much significance they held. Many people believed that dreams during second sleep were more meaningful than those in first sleep. Priests, midwives, and even superstitious merchants gave special attention to what they dreamed in that final stretch of the night. One folk tale tells of a cobbler who dreamed of gold buried beneath a fig tree during second sleep, and when he actually dug there, he found nothing, but decided to grow figs anyway and ended up wealthy. Which, to be fair, is the most realistic kind of happy ending. You reach the market. There's chatter, dogs underfoot, chickens clucking disapprovingly at everything. The world is fully awake now, though a little soft at the edges. People are rested, not rushed. And maybe that's what this whole strange sleep pattern really gave them. Time. Not just sleep, but breathing room. A chance to pause, to reflect, to exist in the night without shame or stress. It's something we might envy, those of us lying awake at 3 a.m., fearing we've failed at rest. But they didn't fear it. They welcomed it. You've made your trades. The bread is still warm beneath its cloth wrapping, and the soft clink of a coin or two now rests in your pocket. A modest victory for a modest morning. You walk home slowly. There's no rush. The sun has climbed a little higher. Its light doesn't exactly flood the earth. It seeps into it, cautiously, like a guest unsure if they're early. As you return, you pass others just beginning their day's work. A blacksmith stokes his forge. A washerwoman kneels by a bucket, sleeves rolled, humming a tune. A child feeds grain to chickens, half asleep and wholly indifferent. Each of them, like you, is a participant in an invisible agreement with time. One that began with segmented sleep and now stretches into daily rhythm. And here's the thing. This wasn't unusual or labeled. No one wrote self-help books about how to maximize your rest with 2 sleeps. It wasn't productivity hacking. It was simply how people lived. Let's imagine you're a scholar, perhaps a tutor for a local noble family, or a cleric with access to books. Your mornings after second sleep might begin with a few careful notes about dreams, weather, or celestial patterns. Some journals from the 1700s record detailed entries that begin with phrases like, "after my second rising," or "in the time following my second slumber," before launching into contemplations about God, crops, or the neighbor's terrible singing voice. Historians still argue whether literacy influenced how people experienced segmented sleep, or if it was the other way around. Did the quiet pause between sleeps encourage reflection and journaling, or were literate folks simply more likely to document the habit? It's one of those chicken and quill dilemmas. Now, back at home, the fire is going strong again. the room is brighter, and breakfast has made its quiet journey from pot to bowl. If you live with others, family, apprentices, servants, this is when the house feels most alive. Chores are being delegated, meals are being cleaned up, tools are being gathered. And amidst it all, you feel steady. You've woken slowly. You've passed through the sacred gap between sleeps. You've moved from dream to waking not with alarm, but with grace, with rhythm. In the modern world, we expect sleep to behave like a vending machine. Insert 8 hours, receive full energy. But your ancestors knew better. They accepted sleep as a process, not a product, one that meandered, paused, returned, like a river with eddies and slow curves, not a straight shot down a pipe. You may not have called it segmented sleep. You probably didn't call it anything. It was just what the body did when left to its own devices. And this rhythm offered something we've largely forgotten: permission to be still. In the middle of the night, no panic, no self-judgment, just a quiet acceptance that sleep isn't broken if it bends. Let's not romanticize it too much, though. There were still tired people. People who got poor rest because they were cold, sick, or sleeping six to a bed. People who woke up cranky and stayed that way. People who had to run to the privy in the middle of second sleep and stubbed a toe on the chamber pot. Sleep, segmented or not, was not always graceful. But the culture around it was different, more patient, more forgiving. You could wake up at 1:30 a.m., light a candle, say a prayer, tend a fire, whisper with someone you loved, and not feel like your night was ruined. It was just a pause, a breath. And that pause didn't steal from your rest, it enriched it. We even see this in architecture. Some 18th century homes were built with narrow hallways or night corridors leading to kitchens or side rooms, places where a person might go quietly between sleeps without disturbing the entire household. In larger homes, warming rooms were kept just off the main sleeping quarters for this very reason. And in cities, people sometimes wrote letters during the night watch and sent them first thing in the morning by footboy or runner. One such letter from a merchant to his cousin begins, "I write to you between rests, with the fire low and my dog twitching at dreams by the hearth. I expect your reply before supper." Just imagine. A time when waking up at night meant you were being poetic, not problematic. You pull your cloak tighter as a breeze rolls through the yard. The geese honk half-heartedly from their pen. The day's labor awaits, but you don't dread it. You're grounded, because the body has done what it needed to do, not in one perfect, unbroken stretch, but in a pair of restful chapters. A rhythm the world once knew and followed, one you now carry softly into your day. By now, the day is in full swing. The smell of smoke has faded into the background, replaced by earth and animals and whatever your neighbors are cooking. Maybe boiled cabbage, maybe roasted chestnuts, maybe something that smells like it was cooked out of spite. You've been moving for hours, but you don't feel rushed. That's the strange thing. After first and second sleep, your body seems to have stored energy differently. There's no fog, no dragging feet, just a slow but steady hum. The two-sleep rhythm has done its work, quietly, without fuss. As you go about your daily tasks, carrying buckets, sweeping floors, measuring fabric, sorting beans, there's a natural flow to it all. It's not glamorous, no one's handing out medals, but it's real. You live in a world without clocks on every wall, without the buzz of fluorescent lights, without caffeine drip-fed into your bloodstream at regular intervals. And yet, you're functioning. More than that, you're present. And here's a curious detail. In many households, midday naps were also common. Yes. In addition to segmented night sleep, people, especially those doing physical labor, might lie down after lunch for a brief third rest. Not an hour-long siesta, but a short pause, a moment to reset. Some called it taking one's ease. Others simply found a bench, leaned back, and shut their eyes. Historians still argue. Whether this third rest was a necessity due to early rising, or simply a luxury afforded by flexible work, either way, it reinforces the idea that sleep wasn't boxed in. It flowed through life like a thread, looping, stretching, returning when needed. Compare that to now, where a 10-minute desk nap gets you strange looks and maybe a visit from HR. But back then, rest was a rhythm, not a reward. Let's zoom out a little. What you've experienced, this entire 24-hour cycle, is not some quaint, medieval oddity. It lasted well into the 18th and even early 19th centuries. People across Europe, parts of Asia, and colonial America described the same thing, sleeping in two parts, a wakeful middle, a gentle return, and often a nap by the fire before supper. Even literary references back it up. In Charles Dickens' Barnaby Rudge, he describes a character waking from first sleep and preparing for something in the middle of the night. It wasn't a plot twist, it was just reality. Everyone knew what he meant. And yet, despite all this, segmented sleep slowly disappeared. You might be wondering, when exactly did we abandon it? The answer is, slowly, quietly, gradually. As industrialization crept in, with its factories and shift work and timed bells, people started shaping their lives around clocks instead of candles. Gas lamps lit the night, then electric bulbs. The boundary between day and night blurred. The wakeful pause between sleeps began to feel inconvenient. And so, we squashed our sleep into one tidy, uninterrupted block. Whether it fit or not, doctors began calling fragmented sleep insomnia. The midnight wake-up became something to fix, not embrace. And over time, we forgot that the two-sleep system had been the norm for thousands of years. One French physician in 1823 wrote mournfully, "We used to wake in the night and feel closer to God. Now we chase unconsciousness like a drunkard chases wine." Dramatic? Absolutely, but he had a point. So here you are now, wiping flour from your hands, or setting tools back in their place, or maybe just watching the sun tilt lower in the sky. The afternoon has arrived, and with it, that particular 18th century weariness, not exhaustion, but the steady fatigue of a day well underway. You might stretch your arms, glance toward a chair, and wonder if you have time to doze before supper. You probably do, because rest back then didn't need to be earned. It was built in. It came in waves. You close your eyes for just a moment. Behind your lids, the memory of second sleep still lingers. Those deeper, dream-drenched hours, that quiet firelight, the sensation of blankets like warm bread dough. The modern world may have buried that rhythm beneath alarms and schedules, but somewhere in you, it still lives. It always will. The day is winding down now. The light has changed again, softer, warmer, casting long golden fingers across the yard or the cobbled street outside your window. Shadows stretch like yawns. Birds quiet. Even the air feels heavier, as if the entire world has been up since dawn and is ready to sit down for supper and not speak for a while. You've worked, traded, mended, cleaned, maybe even daydreamed a little. And now, like every 18th century evening, you're slipping gently into the first steps of winding down. There's no rush. Dinners are simple. Bread, stew, whatever the day provided. You eat with your family or neighbors, quietly, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with silence. A child might recount a story, or someone might grumble about a broken wheel. But no one's checking email. No one's doom scrolling. Instead, people sit a while after the meal. Someone pokes the fire. Someone else pulls out some embroidery or a dull knife that needs sharpening. And perhaps you lean back and let the rhythm of the day settle into your bones like warmth into a stone floor. Here's a fun, quiet truth. This was the best part of the day for many people. Why? Because they knew what was coming next. First sleep. That glorious initial descent into deep rest, the sleep of still full bellies, of tired muscles, of cooling hearths, the sleep that signaled the day's official end, even if the night still had a surprise visit planned, somewhere around midnight. Historians still debate whether this early bedtime, often around 8 or 9 p.m., was strictly practical, limited candlelight, lack of stimulation, or if it was partly biological. Did people want to sleep early, or did they simply get bored once darkness fell? Likely both, but the result was the same. By the time the stars were fully out, most households were tucked in, some already snoring. You might picture a long house with several family members sharing beds, children curled up like kittens, elders snoring like tiny bellows, and the dog curled at someone's feet for both warmth and flea distribution. Or maybe you imagine a quieter home, just a couple or a single lodger, the air filled with the scent of lavender, wax, and smoke. Either way, the night belonged to first sleep. And unlike today, people didn't lie awake worrying about their taxes or their inboxes or that weird noise the fridge made. Although, to be fair, they did sometimes worry about wolves, fires, or ghosts. But hey, every era has its version of 2 a.m. anxiety. Still, first sleep was deep. Really deep. Many sleep scientists now believe that, because people went to bed so early, and often without artificial light, their melatonin production peaked more naturally, meaning their bodies were ready for true slow-wave sleep almost instantly. You didn't toss and turn. You dropped like a stone. There are records of people remembering dreams from this phase as foggy, symbolic, and often emotional. One woman in 1781 wrote in her journal, "In my first rest, I saw the river carry away my childhood. It was sad and sweet, which is both poetic and maybe a little unsettling." Meanwhile, second sleep dreams tended to be more vivid, sometimes absurd, often filled with conversations or stories, maybe because they came after that mysterious midnight wakefulness, when your mind was already half stirred, half rooted in thought. And here's something lovely. Many people planned for this segmented pattern. They didn't just collapse into bed. They structured their sleep. Letters were written earlier in the day to be read after first rest. Certain foods were saved for the midnight gap. Fires were banked, not extinguished, so that the rekindling could be done easily. Some households even left night tasks ready: light mending, quiet reading, a stool by the fire, all in anticipation of the in-between time. Because for them, waking at night wasn't a failure, it was a feature. So as the evening deepens and you finish your meal, put away your tools, and perhaps take one last stroll to the privy under a sky salted with stars, you know what's coming. Not just a sleep, but two. And strangely, that feels reassuring. You wash your hands in a cold bowl. You blow out one of the candles. You stretch, yawn, maybe make some offhand joke about how your legs belong to someone 40 years older than you. And then, finally, you lie down. The room cools. The fire crackles softly. Somewhere outside, an owl calls once, then disappears into silence. You pull the blanket up to your chin, shift your weight just so, and let your eyes drift shut. Sleep doesn't come all at once. It arrives in layers, soft, steady, familiar, just as it has for generations. Darkness wraps around you like a thick woolen blanket. There's no hum of appliances, no blue glow under the door, just blackness, deep and total, broken only by the ember glow from the hearth or a faint sliver of moonlight slipping through the shutters. You're asleep. Fully, deeply, blissfully asleep. This is your first sleep, and it is exactly what it sounds like. The first of two natural acts your body performs every night. Your muscles slacken. Your mind dives deep. Dreams come in slow, syrupy waves. Nothing too vivid yet. Just murmurs and moods, like your brain's running its own lullaby in a foreign language. Time passes. Not that you're aware of it. And then, softly, subtly, you begin to rise. Not all the way to waking, but enough to feel your body stir beneath the covers. Your eyes may flutter. You might roll over. You could even mumble something entirely incoherent and startlingly profound, like, "The cows have the better argument," which makes sense to no one, not even you. Because this is what happened every night. In the 18th century, people woke up and didn't panic. They shifted. They adjusted the blankets. They sometimes lit a candle. If the hearth was cold, someone might rise to place another log on the fire. Quietly, carefully, not to wake the entire household, but just enough to keep the chill at bay. This interlude between first and second sleep was not treated as insomnia. It was simply the wake. A middle ground of consciousness, not quite night, not quite morning. Some people prayed, others read from small devotional books. Some couples whispered or cuddled or simply held hands in the dark. You, maybe, sit up slowly, not to check your phone or scroll your feed, because blessedly, none of that exists, but just to sit, to be. You stretch your arms, hear your joints click faintly. You might pour a bit of water from a clay jug, sip slowly, savor the taste of something cold and clean. Historians still argue whether this wakefulness served a deeper psychological function. Was it a time for processing emotion? A moment for the mind to drift gently between dream and clarity? Some believe it was a kind of built-in meditation. Others think it was simply biology reacting to circadian rhythms shaped by darkness and diet and activity levels. But what's certain is that people didn't fear it. They planned for it. Some even looked forward to it. One 18th century journal entry reads, "I did wake from my first slumber, and thought long upon the orchard and my mother's hands. I did not mind the hour. It was a good thinking." Imagine that, waking in the night and calling it a good thinking. Not a failure, not a flaw, but something gentle, natural, human. You lie back down eventually, as most did. After 20 minutes, an hour, sometimes two. And second sleep wraps you again, heavier now, dream-rich, strangely sacred. It's this second phase that carried the most vivid visions, the strangest thoughts, the conversations you'd swear you'd actually had. Doctors of the time believed second sleep allowed the mind to wander more creatively. Priests said this was when the soul spoke loudest. Midwives claimed women dreamed of future children in this stage. Farmers? They probably just dreamed about better weather and unbroken plowshares. But what's lovely is that the entire culture adapted around this rhythm. Street life quieted early to allow for early bedtimes. Church bells marked midnight not just as a spiritual hour, but as the halfway point in a shared slumber. Even animals in the yard stirred with the household, used to someone tending a fire or murmuring by the hearth. You lived in a world that embraced a longer night, one that understood that sleep was not a single stone, but a mosaic, pieces placed just so, with gaps in between and beauty in the pattern. The waking moments didn't break the rest. They completed it. Back in your imagined 18th century bed, your breathing slows again. The room has cooled, but not unbearably. You hear one final pop from the fire, a stubborn log giving up the last of its strength. Your fingers twitch once, then go still. You return to sleep, not as a fresh start, but as a continuation. The second act, the dream encore. The body remembers the way. It always has. The final hour before dawn. It comes not with trumpets or proclamations, but in the tiniest shifts. The darkness just a shade thinner, the air just a bit lighter. The coals in the hearth have dimmed to quiet red dots, barely clinging to warmth. The house is still. No voices, no footsteps, just the creak of wood settling and the soft sigh of someone dreaming nearby. You are deep within, second sleep now. This is the richest part, the sleep that seems to reach down into the soles of your feet and wring out every last drop of fatigue. Your mind roams in vivid dreams, some strange, some familiar. You might find yourself walking through a memory from childhood, only the streets are made of wool, and your best friend is now a goat who speaks Latin. That sort of thing. In the 18th century, people described these dreams as closer to waking life. Not necessarily more realistic, but more immersive. Like you were present inside them, not just watching them from a distance. And when second sleep finally began to fade, people didn't jerk awake like startled pigeons. No one hit a snooze button. They stirred gradually. First the hands, then the eyes, then the full stretch of legs under thick woolen blankets. That's where you are now, waking up, but gently. The fire, now mostly ash, is quietly waiting for attention. The birds outside are beginning their test notes. One chirp here, another there, like they're tuning their instruments before the full concert. The first streak of gray-blue sky peeks through a shutter's gap. It's morning. And here's the thing. You don't feel cheated. Despite the fact that your sleep came in two parts, separated by a quiet, candlelit hour of wakefulness, you feel rested, grounded, ready. There's no sense of confusion. No, what time is it? Panic. Just the slow emergence into the world, like a boat rising with the tide. Historians still debate the exact moment this practice faded from memory. Some say it began with the street lamps, gaslight making late-night reading easier and pushing bedtimes later. Others blame the factory bell, pulling people into rigid work schedules that demanded early rising and continuous, efficient sleep. But regardless of the cause, by the late 19th century, segmented sleep was all but forgotten. The idea of waking in the middle of the night became not a norm, but a disorder. Insomnia, a problem to be fixed. What was once ordinary, waking to pray, to think, to sit in peace, became something to medicate. It's strange, isn't it? That what your body once naturally did, without shame or diagnosis, became something feared. That the pause between sleeps, the gap that once cradled dreams, thoughts, and moments of grace, was deemed a flaw. But now, here, in this story, in this moment, you remember. You've walked through an 18th century day, not just in facts and chores and powdered wigs, but in rhythms, in patterns. You've slept like your ancestors, twice, and awoken whole. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you wake at 3 a.m., you won't panic. You'll remember the firelight, the quiet, the fact that once, for hundreds of years, this moment was considered sacred, a time to reflect, to breathe, to exist without urgency. You sit up, rub your eyes, and swing your feet to the floor. The day has begun, not because you forced it to, but because your body knows. Now, the fire has faded. The room is still. You've journeyed across centuries, but not in leaps, just quiet steps. One moment, one dream, one flicker of firelight at a time. You've seen how people once slept in 2 acts, how they woke gently, not with alarm, but with purpose. You've walked the muddy streets, stirred soup by candlelight, stretched beneath itchy blankets, and returned again to dreams that weren't broken, just paused. You felt what it's like to trust your body, to listen, to move with the rhythm of darkness and dawn, not in a rush, not in fear, just in flow. And now, as this story ends, your own night continues. Maybe you're drifting, maybe you're already gone, or maybe, like those 18th century dreamers, you'll wake for a while in the night and not be alarmed. You'll stretch, you'll breathe, you'll remember that you are not broken, you are simply resting. The old way. Because sleep has never been about perfection. It's about return. Return to calm. Return to quiet. Return to yourself. So wherever you are, curled in a blanket, nestled under the stars, or listening through a pair of earbuds in a crowded apartment, know this. You are allowed to sleep the way your ancestors did, in 2 parts, with peace in between. And when the morning comes, let it find you slowly. Let it rise with you like smoke from a banked fire, software patient, rested. Good night, sweet dreams.